I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and you're listening to the Modern Motherhood Podcast from All Mom Does, where our aim is to equip, encourage, and inspire you for the life you're living, the kids you're raising, the relationships you're navigating. We often tend to find at least some of our identity in the generation we've been raised in, whether that's Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z, or any of the other gens out there. And we often seek to understand coworkers or kids, other people in our community, by the generation they are part of. Well, today, my guest, Grant Skeldon, joins me to talk about what he's learned as he studied generational identity and how it influences the workplace, our churches, our families, and our broader communities. Grant, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me, Julie.
So you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a fellow Texan. Great to see you. Tell us about you and your life and what all you've been up to, where you're from, all the things.
Yeah. So I've been in Dallas since I was in kindergarten. I actually call myself a George Bailey enthusiast, and that's my unofficial title. Are you familiar with who that is from It's a Wonderful Life?
Of course.
Okay. A lot of people haven't seen that movie. It's like so many people I've seen parts of the movie around Christmas time. But George Bailey, he kind of is similar to my story in the sense, or just I would liken him to many millennials, is that he's in this town. He can't wait to leave. And because I used to not really like Dallas. I wanted to go up north, go to New York, go to Seattle, go to somewhere like a cooler city, if you will. But kind of like George Bailey, I never got to do that. And I think God kind of hit me with, what if you like stayed here and invested long term in the city that I've planted you? Instead of trying to start over in a new city, you could really build on a foundation I've given you in your city. And so kind of like George Bailey, he can't wait to get out of Bedford Falls. I think a lot of millennials are like that. They're constantly changing their job, their church, their city. And, the average millennial right now is on the trajectory to have 14 jobs by the time that they're 40 years old. Not even by the time they die, just by the time they hit 40. And so they're constantly changing their ladder, and they're never getting to see the top because they're dissatisfied with not seeing the results. And so all that to say, a lot of what I am about is Dallas. I'm about discipleship and training the next generation to train the next generation, because I actually think we talk way too much about millennials. We need to talk about the Z generation. And where the millennial generation is important is, how do we train millennials now so that they can disciple the Z generation, I would say like tomorrow, because they're here. And then lastly, I care a lot about division. Just how do we break division between generations, racial divisions, and even socioeconomic divisions, and especially occupational divisions. Sometimes I feel like in the church, it seems like if you're not in vocational ministry, you feel like you're on the B team. But I feel like since most young people aren't going to church, we need to go back to what Jesus did when he picked his disciples. He didn't pick any scribes or Pharisees or Sadducees. He picked marketplace people that were rubbing shoulders with unbelievers all the time. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do is disrupt the division between generations, races, and even occupations, so that we can be the church that the enemy can't defeat or even defend himself against.
I love all of that. I think there is so much treasure in just those three simple things that you've outlined about what your heartbeat is. Define for us how you see millennial. And by that, I mean, give us the age range, because I've seen different studies, some that say, okay, millennials are those who were born between, say, 1985 and 2003, which means of my 8 kids, I'm raising 6 millennials, and then I would have 2 Gen Z because they were born in 2007. But I know that some of those year markers have shifted some, and now we're calling Gen Z a little bit different birth lane in terms of the year. So how do you define it? How do you define who's a millennial and who's a Gen Z?
Yeah, and maybe I should put more thought into it, but I do think the most general one, because you're right, the window shifts about 5 years earlier or later, but I usually just say 1980 to 2000. That's a pretty general one if you were born between 1980 to 2000. But I think more important than like the time, because let's say someone's like 1979, I don't think they're going to be massively different because they didn't hit that window. And so I don't care too much about those 5-year difference, but I do think there were major events or unique events, and especially unique things when growing up, for that window of time. But in the book, I actually point out that there's 6 types of millennials, because sometimes we try to make millennials like all one person somehow, like they're all gluten-free, they all wear skinny jeans, they all have beards, and they all are vegan, and they're all these different things, but it's impossible. Like they don't all have like social media and all that. And so a Boston consultancy group actually kind of categorized 6 different types of millennials. It was hippennials, which I won't go into it. It's in the book, but hippennial, a gadget guru, a millennial mom, a clean and green millennial, an anti-millennial, and then an old school millennial. And it kind of helps you see, okay, what kind of millennial is my child, and what are they about? What are they not about? How do I better engage them? Because I feel like a lot of the books out there and the blogs out there on millennials, ironically, they're not by millennials. They're by usually older generations. And that'd be like men writing a book on women and what women want and need. I'm sure they can do great research, but if you don't have a woman's voice, I think you'd agree that something's going to be missing in their conclusions. And so I wanted to write a book on millennials, about millennials by millennial, but actually for non-millennials that are trying to better understand our generation.
I think it's brilliant. And I think you're so right. I think to be someone who is actually within that space, and it is your generation, and to be giving those clues and that insight into what this passion generation is all about is so helpful, rather than someone who's outside of the dynamic, just making their observations. I think it's really powerful. So what got you initially interested in the millennial space and becoming a voice for the millennial space?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it a little bit. I definitely didn't.
How many of our callings does that seem to be how it is? We kind of arrive and go, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Okay.
Yeah. I got asked one day to speak on a panel. It was about 5 years ago around this time on millennials, 2 days before this major conference. It was about 2,000 people. It was a big deal to me. I know Tim Keller was going to be there and speaking, and all these like really big names. And then I got asked, and at the time I was doing not much of anything, but I was like really intentional with my generation. I was leading a smaller organization. I wasn't known, like I wasn't a conference speaker. And I got asked 2 days before. And I think because they didn't have any millennials on this millennial panel. And so I spoke, and honestly, Julie, I was going to go in and say, like, look, you guys have like 30 to 40 speakers and you only have one millennial speaking. Even on a millennial panel, you don't barely have any millennials. And I said, this is the nature of what the church is like towards our generation. You guys like criticize us, but you don't give us any voice or power or responsibility. And then you expect like all this from us. And lastly, I would say most of y'all are not even pouring into anyone in the next generation. Like, I don't know many young friends that are getting discipled by older generations, even though that's what Jesus was all about. And so everything I think I was going to say was true, but the tone was like out of like spite a little bit or anger. And so God did this inconvenient thing of convicting me like the day before, and just kind of postured me to go towards that panel in a humble spirit. And I kind of just went and said, look, I am more mature than most of my generation. That's why I got asked to do this. And I am that way because older men poured into me. I got lucky to be discipled 2 weeks after I got saved. Like March 8, 2006, I gave my life to Christ, and I stumbled into that too. I definitely didn't plan on becoming a Christian that day. And then 2 weeks later, I had a man say, hey, I'd love to take you under my wing and disciple you. I know it's going to be hard since you don't have a Christian father, since you don't have any Christian friends, and I'd love to like pour into you. And that guy, I would say, it was the second most impactful day of my life and relationship in my life to Jesus, because I could have, like many young people, got saved at a camp of some sort and then just wandered and tried to figure out, and most fall away. And I think I did it. And most 20-somethings I know that are unbelievably mature, they are where they are because older men and women poured into them and believed in them and connected them. And so I just kind of plead to the crowd, if you want maturity, like, invest in us, pour into us. Like, we need you. It's not young people are really cool and going to change the world. We need the wisdom of your generation. And that opened so many doors to speak at more things. And I would say to this day, I've never had an agent really. It's just snowball effect. From 5 years ago, that one event led to probably 9 events, which have led to, last year I spoke to a little over 100,000 people on how to reach and engage the next generation. And so it was a God thing. I never would have thought that was the way to make that happen.
That's incredible. I just love hearing stories like that where God just interrupts and just places someone exactly where he needs them to be a voice to a generation. And you're speaking absolutely into the center for something that has been a huge heartbeat for me, because I have this just passion about the fact that, what it's called in the Word of God, the spirit of Caleb, which is that older generation remaining relevant and showing people how to do battle, and the desire that millennials have for that. It's not about that, an older generation's been shut out. But at the same time, I think one of the problems of my generation and those older than me who have preceded me is this desire to try to preserve instead of transform. it's not about trying to make millennials like yuppies. It's not about trying to make millennials like baby boomers. That is not the point of discipling. It's about equipping someone within their own generation to do battle, like it talks about in the Old Testament with the spirit of Caleb.
Yeah. Billy Graham has a quote where he said, the methods, they always change, but the message, it always stays the same. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we should really marry the message, but only kind of date the methods. So we're okay with like those things changing, but we're really serious about the message. And someone I give a lot of props to in the Bible that almost never gets any props in the Bible is Saul, the first one in the Bible, in the Old Testament.
The Old Testament guy, yeah.
Yeah. Saul, I mean, he did do a lot of bad things, but the one thing that I don't think anyone ever notices or gives him credit for is like, in the church today, we tend to not give big responsibilities to young people. In the book, I said, if you were, and I think this is why young people are leaving the church, because they have no real ownership in the church. And for example, if you join the army at 18 years old, you'll be given a lethal weapon and sent to another country to represent this country. If you join a nonprofit at 19 years old, you could be put over a youth program or something big in like Uganda or some nonprofit you could work with. But if you join the church, usually the church is like, okay, do you want to be on the parking team or the greeting team, or do you want to hand out pamphlets, or what do you want to do? And it's like, all of youth ministry, you told us to go and change the world and to reach our schools and to do this and that. And now I'm going to big church, and all you're saying is I can help make this event go well once a week in this building, even though you say church isn't an event. And so I don't know. We tend to not give big responsibilities to young people, because I know why. Is like, if they mess up, it can really mess up everything. And you want them to fail small first. But Saul gave the biggest responsibility to someone who is young, who totally didn't deserve it. Like, if David lost that fight against Goliath, the whole nation had to serve the Philistines. And it didn't even make sense to pick this young person, because all Saul knew David for was playing music for him. Like, right. It's not even like he was a warrior. He was there because he was bringing food for his brothers and for some of the soldiers. And so the second thing that you kind of said is to make them like the yuppies, or make them like the way we did it. I love that Saul, and again, it almost seems crazy, like that Saul didn't make him wear his armor, or didn't make him fight Goliath the way that he would have fought Goliath, or thought you should have fought Goliath, or seen everyone before him fight Goliath. He let him go a different route. But that different route was what was needed for that season. And so anyway, I just think that the more we empower young people to fail forward and give them big responsibilities, maybe we'll see God do something new. And they got to be hungry, and they got to be honorable. If 7 out of 10 young people are leaving the church right now, the current methods are not working.
It's not working. And, I have written on this before, where I have said to moms, you are not your child's personal assistant. I don't quite know what happened in that we have 18, 19, 20-year-olds who don't even know how to call and make their own dentist appointment, because mom and dad have done those things for them for so long. We've called it the helicoptering style of parenting. We've called it all these different things. But at the end of the day, if we don't imbue responsibility on people, they will not rise to it. And then we don't get to be surprised when they don't know how to do it, when they don't know how to step into it, because we didn't allow for that. I think this is really fascinating for listeners in this way. We have moms out there who are raising millennials. We also have moms who are listening who are millennials and who are raising the next generation. And this is part of what I love about having you on, because it really does span. We have moms who are parenting, spanning these generations, either parenting those who are in the generation we're talking about, or are in that generation and are parenting the next. So what are some trends that you're seeing within parenting today, either those who are parenting millennials or those who are millennials and are parenting, that you can speak to?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not married and I don't have kids. Tomorrow I start like a premarital counseling class. It's called Merge in my city. But I don't want to come off like I'm the expert. But the one thing I have thought a lot about as I've gotten to be around the next generation, and I would assume millennials are doing better, is just being more intentional about limiting just screen time, if you will. I've heard teenagers of this next generation, even after millennials, called screenagers, because they're always on their phone. I think the excerpt parents to millennials, who knew that like social media and the technology was going to advance as much as it did in our generation, but also affect us and be as addictive as it is. And so now for millennials, I mean, we're the byproduct of seeing how addictive it is. And I was talking to someone recently. I was like, I wonder if sooner than later there will be a type of, in the same way that smoking for my grandparents or maybe their parents' generation seemed to be like just a common thing. But then after a while, they realize, wow, this is really hurting us. And now it's done in moderation, if just avoided altogether. I think hopefully for the millennial generation, we're like, hey, this was introduced us at a young age, but this social media thing and this is more than just losing my time. It's comparison. They say that my generation has OCD more than any other generation, obsessive comparison disorder.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, so we're constantly comparing. And now, I mean, for these millennial moms, that's a huge market of comparison on social media. Is like not just comparing you to another individual, but to a mom's parenting style and her excellence level, I guess, in doing that. And so just limiting how much are we going to give this to our kids. I know it's so easy to, my brother, we talked a little bit about this. I know it's so easy when the kid can like be quiet or settle down when you give them a phone. I'm hoping that that'd be one area that we're a lot more intentional, because I think social media, the whole idea of keeping up with the Jones is enhanced a million times when you give so much access to social media and make it a norm, because now you've opened the arenas of comparison even more. Like, it's more than just seeing the neighbor down the street in their new car or their new house or their new like patio or whatever it may be. Now you're seeing their lunch, their dinner, their party, their vacation home, their every single moment that looks better than yours while you're watching Netflix at night and feeling like, I think it's leading to a lot of depression and unnecessary comparisons that weren't even allowed or able 30 years ago. So that is one area. The last thing I would also say is I think it's very important, crucial that our generation, millennials, do a way better job of being around older generations and seeking wisdom. We have a tendency to be like, I would say, Lord of the Flies, where we're just kind of raise ourselves and hang out with ourselves and make our own rules. And so it can turn into like sixth graders asking other sixth graders for dating advice, which just isn't smart. And so I think the more we can be around older generations and seek wisdom from them, they've had marriages and they've had kids and they've been there, then it's going to allow us to pour better wisdom and better, healthier input into our kids, I think, and prepare them even to disciple the next generation.
Back with Grant in just a moment. Have you ever considered what kind of parenting personality you have? Sometimes who we are as moms seems like a familiar extension of ourselves, and sometimes there are angles and layers that can surprise us. Well, I've got a free resource for you to check out. Simply go to my website, julielylescarr.com, and submit your email for a free parenting assessment that will give you insight into what makes you tick as a mom and how it corresponds to your kids. Head to my website, julielylescarr.com, for your free assessment today. What do you think is effective discipleship? Because I know that there have been lots of different ideas about what that should look like and what that means. But, to really understand how to disciple someone well, that you are of a different generation. And listen, I think parenting is discipleship. So I think that we're talking,
100%.
Yeah, we miss that sometimes. I think sometimes we think that discipleship, mentorship is somewhere out there. It's other than us, when really the most important place is within the home, the kids that God's given us. But what makes for effective discipleship? And I'm not trying to put you on the hook for like a system that's exactly how you do it. But what I am saying is, what are the things that we need to be cognizant of, things we need to let go of when it comes to our definition of discipleship? And what have you seen be really powerful? Yeah,
ironically, if there's one thing I wouldn't feel like on a hook too much about, and I would say half the book is on how do you get discipled and how do you go disciple someone, but especially for a young person, how do you get discipled now so that we're ready to disciple the Z generation later? Because I keep telling people, if you think millennials are bad now, just wait to the Z generation. When they saw the group before them, millennials, totally walk away from the Lord and try to do things their own way. And they're just unbelievably ill-equipped to even disciple the Z generation. So that's why it's crucial in this like next 5 to 10 year window to disciple millennials and the Z generation very intentionally. But I would say for me, discipleship is, I define it as frequently following someone who is spiritually a step ahead of you. And there's a high emphasis on frequently following. I think discipleship has been dwindled down in a lot of ways to a class or a sermon or a curriculum. And I just don't know. I don't see that in what Jesus did. I would say that's helpful, but it's not discipleship. And in this generation where we are just saturated with content from TV, from, I would say, from church, from social media. We can't avoid content. And so I don't think our issue is not having access to curriculum or content. I mean, we could find that in a second with a push of a button. But what we can't find in this unbelievably connected generation is like real relationships. Like, we're all known, but we don't actually have real relationships. So I would say, if I could frequently follow someone who is spiritually a step ahead of me in some arena, whether it's leading an organization like what I do, or how many people I followed and kind of joined that wrote a book before. They say you got to learn from people's mistakes or learn from your mistakes. And I always try to learn from other people's mistakes rather than my own. And so the hard thing is most people just don't have time to disciple a millennial mom or any young person. And so that's where I like to differentiate the difference between mentorship and discipleship. To me, mentorship is if Jesus said to Peter, hey, come and meet with me. So they have to find a time in their calendar and add that to it. But discipleship is not come and meet with me. It's come and follow me. And that's where the frequently following. And so I say, have someone follow you. Or let's say I'm going to ask someone to disciple me. There's 2 guys that do it currently. I'm going to try to find an area in one of 4 areas of their life where I could find some time they'll allow me to join. There's their family life, their work life, their church life, or their personal life. That could be like hobbies and stuff. Everyone is too busy to disciple. We're a very busy nation, especially if you're a parent. I mean, I heard a quote recently that said everybody gets the same 24 hours. And they said, except for parents, they only get about 2 hours because their kids take all of it.
Agree with that. I would agree with that.
And so they don't have time. I get it. And so what I say is, instead of mentorship, adding something to your calendar, come and meet with me, find a time. Do discipleship, which is come and follow me, which isn't adding something to your calendar. It's including someone in your calendar. So you don't change your life. You see if someone younger is willing to join your family life or your work life or your church life or your personal life. And if you look at Jesus and his disciples, he didn't have weekly meetings with the disciples. He had them follow and join their life. What it requires, though, and this is where I'm pleading to my generation and coaching my generation, is you got to be hungry, and you got to find it more important to be around the older generation than being around your generation, because you have so much free time before you have a spouse or kids. And so use it wisely by seeking out wisdom from the older generations.
Grant, this is brilliant. Like, my heart is so full hearing you distinguish the difference between mentoring and discipleship, because I have a huge passion for the millennial generation. It is my absolute heartbeat to speak into that generation. And yet, in the raising of 8 kids and working full time and books and all the things, I'll have people say to me, could you mentor me? And the guilt that I feel, knowing that if I try to take that on an additional hour or 2 a week, what it's going to do in other areas of my life, in addition to a couple of people I am already mentoring. I love this distinction between mentoring and discipleship. It's brilliant. And part of what you've tapped into is something that I've been watching for a long time. You know, really what you're describing is almost like an internship or an apprenticeship, where you would come alongside someone who had developed a skill, was a craftsman, and you would observe that. And we as a culture have lost that. We used to have people go into apprenticeship in order to learn a skill, in order to learn a craft. And we began to instead offset that into schools or vocational training or whatever and do it that way. And while that can be more efficient and all of those things, there is an art to apprenticeship that got lost somewhere. I see you really calling forth and trying to resurrect really that apprenticeship kind of thing. I think it's amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, like you just said, even it's lost in, I would say colleges is one of the, in a way, worst areas where you see it's lost, because everyone always says this is the most educated generation, millennials, and then it's also one of the most jobless generation. And I think the irony that colleges have a better guarantee of putting kids in debt than actually getting them a job is showing that maybe it's because they know a lot of curriculum or content, but they have never seen it done, or they've never had the experience of following people. One of the things I also wanted to say, thinking of mothers in mind, I have found a lot of young women, because my program has 72 young leaders from 40 different churches, and it's an 8-month accelerator. And the young girls always say, man, when I ask moms to disciple me, or even married women, they usually don't want to invite me into their home or into their family life, because they're like, man, the moms are kind of embarrassed that their house is kind of a mess and stuff. And I always have to tell them, like, you know, we're not looking for perfect moms. We're looking for just honest and real moms. But one of a story, if I can kind of share, is Rachel, a girl in our group. You have to disciple someone to be in our program. So she started discipling a girl named Audrey at her church. And she went to the Village Church. Well, Audrey, ironically, was Matt Chandler and Lauren Chandler's daughter. And so she was discipling their daughter. And if you were a mom and your kid came home and said, hey, this girl's starting to disciple me, I'd assume you'd want to know who that girl is.
Right.
And so they're like, hey, can we, Lauren Chandler was like, we'd love to meet Rachel. And so they meet, and basically, from what I understand, they had a pretty strong connection. And eventually, Lauren asked if she could disciple Rachel as Rachel discipled her daughter, Audrey.
Beautiful.
And I think as a mom, and I tell the story in the book, I think that's so brilliant. Because like you already said, without a doubt, if you are a mother or a father, you're discipling your kids. You can do it intentionally or unintentionally, but they are frequently following you. And you are spiritually a step ahead. And so what's brilliant is to disciple your kid, then also disciple the most influential young person to your kid. And eventually it even led to Rachel, who was discipling her daughter, Audrey. Lauren asked, could you move in with us? Like, would you be open to doing that? She was looking for a new place to rent, and they had an open room. And that's real life-on-life discipleship. But as I got to kind of talk to them about the process, they loved it. But they said, yeah, it gets messy and it gets difficult. And they see the good and the bad and the ugly. But John Maxwell has a quote where he says, if you want to impress people, share your successes. But if you want to impact people, share your failures. And they were saying that probably the failures and how they respond to the failures is what's really grown Rachel the most. And Rachel totally agreed with that. And so I just like to encourage moms or women. You don't have to be perfect. My mom, sometimes when she walked into church, I always joke like, Mom, I knew God was real. Because the second you walked in the church, you became a new creation.
You transformed.
Like you were such a different person at church. And even when people from church would call, you would be like spanking us. But the second a Christian called, you were like, your voice and your tone, like a heart of stone was changed for a heart of flesh. So God must have been real. And so I don't know. I don't see men change as much. And I see that among women a little bit more. Not all. I don't want to generalize all women. But I think that can be a deterrent to discipleship, because the following part is so much harder when you have to invite people into seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly. But it can be beautiful if you see that you're not saying, follow me and I'll make you like Christ. You're saying, follow me as I follow Christ.
Right, exactly. And I think that distinction is so powerful. And we have a program at my home church that I'm the lead at our home church for women, and we have a program we call Life Moms, and we have women who are a little further down the parenting path. Parenting doesn't end, right? I mean, there are some of them that have children who are now in their 30s and 40s, and there are still challenges and places that they're parenting even though their kids are launched. But those women circle up at tables with these younger women every week, and that is a mentoring commitment. But I'm telling you, and now that you've brought this distinction to light for us, really where I see some of the most powerful transformation happen. What happens around those tables is important, but it is those women who have now invited these young moms into their homes to see how they do things, how they organized something, how they're, just to follow along exactly as you said. Those are the transformation stories that I think have the most lasting impact. Sure, where we gather, that's a great catalyst to get it moving and the effort that we put into that event every Monday. But you're so right. It's what happens away from the event itself every Monday that I think is really the most critical. Now, talk to me about why you have named for yourself this millennial generation, the passion generation.
Yeah, if you're a parent of a millennial, especially a millennial that's kind of left the church, or a millennial, especially if you're a parent of a millennial that's just kind of failing to launch or struggling to find their footing in their career and stuff like that, I named it for that generation because in the book, chapter 3 tends to be the chapter that connects the most with parents of millennials. Is I felt like this generation is choosing their job, and this isn't even new. Like, I think people can see this. They're choosing their job and their major based off of passion a lot more than provision. And generations before, especially boomers, I think would choose their major and their job based off provision. Like, what is going to be a good, stable, strong job that will provide for me, but also provide a better life for my family. Even the concept of the American dream is very provision mindset. But I think for this generation, I said the American dream can sometimes seem like a millennial nightmare, because what it has is a lot of parents pushing, hey, and I ask young people this all the time. When was the last time your parents shared a concern for how much money you make or how much money you don't make, or your job, or something to do with your grades because of getting a job and stuff like that? And they're like, all the time, whether they're in school or out of school, they're like, my parents, that seems to be one of the biggest things they care about is money-oriented stuff. And so what it seems to push towards them is it's all about making money. And I know for older generations, it seems to be like once you're stable and you've made good money, then you can pursue your passions. But for young people, I've found who got to see their parents pursue money and then their passion, they got to see, at least a lot of my generation, got to see their parents, especially their dad, give their soul for a job that made good money, but they couldn't stand and they were trying to avoid. And once they came home, they would just like decompress and veg out, and also sometimes give up their spiritual and emotional responsibilities to their family because they were so exhausted from their job. And then they would try to pursue hobbies, and the weekend was to get away. And so I think they've seen it happen enough to say, our generation's like, I don't know if I want to wait to pursue my passions. I think I'd rather pursue my passion more than provision. I mean, 52%, so a little bit over half of millennials, not Christian millennials, just millennials in general, Business Journal found, are willing to take a drastic pay cut, not just a small pay cut, but a drastic pay cut in order to have a job that made a difference in the world. And so I think our generation wants to be a part of something bigger than themselves and are pursuing their passion. The difficult thing is, as you already know, they want their passion job, which usually takes 5 to 10, 20 years maybe to build into. Mm-hmm. They want it like now. And they're waiting until they find that, and they'll kind of put it on hold. And so this is where I agree with you a lot. As you said, you really can't helicopter parent your kid where you let them move in, you let them stay, you let them not get a job, you let them do all these things. Because I don't agree with my generation pushing the pendulum all the way where it's like, forget provision, we're just going to find our passion job. Because no one that's doing what they're passionate about now started there. They had to do the jobs that were difficult. And so I helped kind of create a bridge of like, how do we do both? Because it's never one or the other. It really is both at different times and different seasons. And I think one of the best things my dad did for me, I didn't like it at the time, but when I dropped out of college and I tried to move back home with my parents, and my mom was totally cool with it. I was sitting at the dinner table. She was like, asking me how things were going, blah, blah, blah. And when my dad came home and saw me there, he's like, no, you're not going to stay here. He started taking my stuff and he put it outside. He's like, you decided to drop out of college, so now you're going to decide what's next for your life. But you can't just come back here. And I said, Dad, so many of my friends get to come live with their parents. I don't want to live here long term, but can at least give me 2 weeks at least. And he's like, no, you have to go. And I hated it at the time. But the two good things, and this is why I really want to encourage parents, is it forced me to make big decisions and wiser decisions because I didn't have the luxury to choose my passion job. I went that day thinking I got to find whatever job will put food on the table and can give me a place to stay and a bed to sleep in. And second, more important than even like that kind of stuff, is the spiritual aspect. If we think about the seasons where God was the most intimate with us and we were close to him, and we were hungry and desperate for him, unfortunately or fortunately, they tend to be seasons that were very difficult seasons. Like things weren't in our control and we knew it and we were just desperate for him and hungry for him. But it was really sweet, even though the circumstances were difficult. Now, we never probably want to go back to that season. However, we wouldn't want to erase that season from our story because of the level of intimacy and probably maturity it grew in us. And so I say to a lot of parents, if you save your kids from those seasons, because that's what it put me in, is a season of, God, I need to know what's next for me, and I need you. You're really all I have, and that tends to be when we realize he's all we need. I remember that, it's probably one of the best seasons in my relationship with the Lord, especially in my early 20s. And I'm so thankful in a way that my dad didn't save me from that season, because what some parents are doing when they do that is they're saving their kid from the Savior, because they're not allowing their kid to, I would say, walk through the valley of the shadow of death, where they'll fear no evil, for God is with them. His rod and his staff, they comfort them. But I joke, if you save your kid from the Savior, they're saying, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for mom is with me. Her purse and her second chances, they comfort me. And so again, you're saving your kid from the Savior. It seems good right now, but in the long run, it actually hurts them more than it helps them.
Yes, and I think that a lot of times moms can get so wrapped in that identity, even if mom herself is a millennial, the temptation for her child, her younger child, to go in and save them and to be the source and to be all of that. I understand that temptation, but you are so right. It is so much more powerful to allow your kids to fail, if you will, while they're still in your home, or allow them to fail while they're within context of you. But to have them be able to lean, I think, is a really incredible thing. I talk about my dad that, he was always there for me, but he would not save me. His main statement was, "You're going to figure it out." And, I have to say, it was a powerful thing. And it's something that my children get to hear from me. Bless their hearts. So,
that's good.
I am going over right now to follow you. So appreciate your passion for God and your passion for the Passion generation. And
Yes.
I know that you have just been an absolute treasure trove of wisdom for us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Julie.
Check out our show notes for more information on Grant and the work that he is doing. You'll find those show notes at allmomdoes.com. And while you're there, be sure and check out all the great posts and tips and giveaways and more that are part of the All Mom Does community. And we'd love to see you on the socials as well. Connect with me on the socials too. I'm Julie Lyles Carr in all the places. Want to show some love and thanks to Rebecca Beckett, our content coordinator, and our producer, Donna Todi, the awesome duo that makes sure the podcast gets out to you each and every week? Then go to wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere, those kind of places, and leave a 5-star rating and review and share the podcast. It really does make a huge difference in getting the word out, and I'd love to feature your review on an upcoming episode. We've got another great episode coming up next week on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.